Okay. Hi, Martine.
Hello, McKinley. How do you do? So nice to be here.
Good. I know it's nice to finally meet somewhat in person and chat. I was just telling you, I guess, before we recorded that Instagram suggested you right when I started Instagram a year ago. And if
Amazing.
I stopped doing Instagram or stopped what I was doing, I would tell everybody to follow you.
Oh,
I'd be like, go follow her. She's got it.
you're such a sweetheart. Yeah. Thank you.
Honestly, though. Yeah. So you're a wife, a mother, and a life coach.
hmm
And you said you've been doing that since around 2012.
That's right. Since my little
Yeah.
boy was around like in toddlerhood, and I
Okay.
decided it actually didn't start off as coaching. It started off as me writing like a blog. And
Mm-hmm.
then it just kind of progressed with readers reaching out, which eventually gave me the idea to like, why don't I study this? Why don't I like be professionally able to hold space for people? And that's kind of like what led me to become a coach eventually.
Very cool. Very cool.
Mm.
And so has it always been sort of through the lens of femininity and womanhood, or were there kind of some other interests that led you into that direction?
It was always through the lens of motherhood because I
Okay.
began the blog, which doesn't exist anymore, which is a whole
Mm-hmm.
other story. I put it to bed basically, but it began because I was a first time mom. And
Mm-hmm.
as with anything, like I had always been writing. So I was a freelance writer too, while I was staying at home. So it was my first time staying at home and not having like a job. Prior to that, I was like a teacher for 7 years at preschool. But when I got married, got pregnant, and gave birth, I was like, I'd really like to stay home. And so I would
Mm-hmm.
write about my musings, about being a stay-at-home mom. And then
Mm-hmm.
eventually, I was like, this is boring. I can't just stay at home and do the housework. I want to write. I want to do something. So I started to write.
Mm-hmm.
And I started a blog that was really for work at home moms. Like I would just talk about like being a work at home mom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, followers of that publication started to reach out. They wanted to meet like in person here. Um, and I thought, like this could be something, this could be like a community thing. So that spawned into community gatherings locally, eventually workshops, like actual
Mm-hmm.
people would create events for me to talk about being a work at home. And this was like way back in like 2010,
Okay.
2011. Okay.
Yeah.
And then eventually I'm like, maybe this could be something that I could do from home. Like stay with
Mm-hmm.
my baby, have more babies, and do something, kind of like I still had the mindset like the Proverbs 31 woman, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so I did. I studied to be a coach. I got certified to be a life coach. Um, and it just yeah, and then here we are 14 years later. Still doing it.
Nice. Yeah.
Lots of evolution because of the way platforms have changed,
Mm-hmm.
gone international, right? And yeah, just still loving it. Still loving the fact that moms are so multidimensional and
Mm-hmm.
so in our element, not just in motherhood per se, but like
Yeah.
the giftings that God has given us, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true.
hmm
I'd love to know a bit about your spiritual journey,
hmm
because I've
Sure.
caught little glimpses of it here and there online. But yeah, I would
Yeah.
love to know sort of where you started and where you are
Sure.
now.
Sure. But
Mm-hmm.
I think what you mean is the times that I reference, like my journey, like specifically my
Mm-hmm.
journey through Christianity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'd begin by saying that that begins when I was around 9 years old. So when I was
Mm-hmm.
around 9 years old, I was, what people might say I was born like a cradle Catholic because the Philippines is actually a very Catholic country, like culturally, like in the same way
Mm-hmm.
that Italy is or Spain is, right? But
Yeah.
when I was 9, that was when we had a born again experience, like as a family.
Mm-hmm.
Like my mom had a miraculous healing in her point of
Mm.
view, right? And
Mhm.
so she's like, we got to join this community that made this healing possible, like the whole laying
Mm.
on of hands,
Yeah.
gifts of the Holy Spirit and everything. So like a charismatic evangelical community.
Okay.
And in that was really my formation. So from 9 all the way through the time I was dating my husband and getting
Mhm.
married and all of that, I was in like what we call now the evangelical kind of Christianity. So
Mhm.
I just want to like name what that is, because evangelical is actually an anthropological term for those
Mm.
studying Christianity outside of Christianity. So it's what
Mm.
anthropologists might call an ethic, right? So it's not like Christians don't call themselves, I'm an evangelical Christian, right? We just call
Mhm.
ourselves believers or saved, all of this
Yeah.
insider language in that
Mhm.
particular type of Christianity. So that was me.
Yeah.
I grew up serving in ministry. That's another insider language that we have, which means
Mhm.
that I was in I was in like the worship team. We
Mhm.
gave like Hillsong style concerts, to young
Mhm.
people on campuses. Like we were there on like the mission field, and I learned many beautiful things there. Like I learned
Mhm.
devotion to scripture. I learned prayer. I learned that we can have a desire to like honor God.
Mm.
But I also learned, to absorb, again, because I was very young when I got into this, to absorb messaging that unintentionally produced fear, which
Mm.
if you hear my work now, I am still a Christian. I consider myself like following the teachings of Jesus Christ, but like that part of my life was where, as a coach now, I realize femininity, for instance, was more centered around how well I could do a particular kind of femininity,
Mhm.
or how pure I could stay. Like I was in the generation of teenagers that I Kissed Dating Goodbye was released
Mhm.
for, like the first publication of that book, like
Okay.
late 90s, early 2000s. Like I was there.
Yeah.
So biology was rarely discussed positively. Like everything was like
Mhm.
hyper spiritualized in the kind of community that I was in. And the body was seen as like something to be managed or controlled rather
Yeah.
than, like like understood from a whole, nuanced, but also like theologically sound perspective. Like,
Mhm.
and of course, the obsession was get married, just get married
Yeah.
so you can have a family and you can,
Mhm.
what's the expression? Like have a quiver full of arrows for God, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And all of that, so that
Yeah.
was kind of like my early formation. And then I went into a time where after we got married, so I have to mention I met my husband there. My husband and I
Mm.
were also serving in youth ministry. And that's how we became friends. That's also how we were kind of like became interested in dating one another, et cetera, et cetera. But when it came for the time for us to raise our family and I was
Mhm.
pregnant, um, we really made the choice that maybe the kind of unintentional fear that was produced by the way we were knowing God in our youth,
Mhm.
maybe that's not something we want for our child. And
Mm.
so we kind of went back to practicing Catholic tradition, which
Mhm.
again, just like I was born into that tradition. I know some people say revert, but it was really more of, I mean, if you understand Catholic thought, you can't leave. You're not like automatically
Mhm.
like, not like the evangelical way of thinking that every
Yeah.
Friday or Wednesday I had to like go to the altar call because who
Mhm.
knows like how much I had fallen from the grace of God. Like
Mhm.
our parish was very open, compassionate, and I
Mm.
started to see kind of like maybe a side of the expression of um Christianity that I hadn't been open to before because I was so young.
Mm.
I was too young to
Yeah.
understand like liturgy,
Mhm.
sacraments. I was too young to understand, like, even the tradition itself, and all the
Yeah.
complexities, right?
Mhm.
So brings me to now where I have a more, I would say, integrated faith, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Um, Definitely has more beautiful complexity, but then again, what are human beings then beautifully complex, right?
Mhm.
And that allowed me to kind of um, really go into helping to coach women because
Mm.
the kind of women that I was also coaching, I don't know what the culture is in, like, well, I'm now familiar. But back then I wasn't familiar with like the culture in the rest of the world and how
Mhm.
so much entanglement and enmeshment happened within just one kind of expression of God and Christianity. And
Mhm.
through learning tools on how to coach, on how to thrive, and how to even unlearn things, unlearn paradigms, I
Yeah.
eventually kind of like rediscovered like a bigger gnosis and picture of God.
Mm.
And, our biology, nature, creation
Mhm.
became not just another way, but it became kind of like the way that we had forgotten of seeing
Yeah.
God's wisdom, which
Mhm.
growing up, I learned the body was sinful, the flesh is weak, the heart is evil, and everything was
Yeah.
in one context.
Mhm.
But then as I got to coaching women, I found that unhooking, untethering from inherited ideas that we never questioned, right? That's what actually brought freedom to a lot of their marriages, to a lot of like the
Mm.
forgiveness that had to happen, to even how they
Mhm.
viewed motherhood and, attachment style and, like
Yeah.
their own psychology.
Mhm.
Um, so that's kind of like been my journey and my coaching now. I coach all sorts of women, I don't just coach women who are Christian. And I think being in the faith lineage that I was born in kind of like helps that because I find that there's
Mm.
so much nuance and spaciousness and space for the fullness of the truth
Mhm.
in well, in the Catholic lineage that I practice now. That
Mhm.
has always been embedded, like in me, like in my
Yeah.
personhood and in my identity without me
Mhm.
consciously tapping into it, I guess, for that
Mhm.
era that I was in that expression of Christianity.
Yeah. Very cool. Is there a moment or something that you can remember that s- brought about the beginning of that shift for you to go from sort of unlearning things in the
Oh,
past to realizing there's this different way of seeing things or
oh,
understanding things?
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I was around 18, I was in the thick of like youth ministry. And so basically youth ministry involving, like winning souls, like young souls for
Mm-hmm.
Christ, meaning we'd go out, we'd go to campuses, we'd give concerts, we'd do Bible study and all of those things. Um, and I just began to notice that we had this ritual that we would basically set up the conditions for. We would set up the conditions for this
Mm-hmm.
ritual of like, okay, we'd lead worship. So I would be on the worship team singing, praising, like my reference point is like Hillsong Bethel style worship,
Yeah.
okay, like rock
Mm-hmm.
concert
Mm-hmm.
that's like praising God. And then I noticed, because I had been to a concert, which like you don't do that, you don't go to like concerts, because they're like all these demons, in those
Yeah.
concerts. But then I went to a concert and I was like, and again, I was so afraid that I went to this concert like in secret with a
Yeah.
bunch of my friends. And like we're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be these holy youth, like bringing
Mm-hmm.
souls for Christ. It was so binary. And then I
Yeah.
realized that when we have this ritual every time we go on campus, and it's like we set up a doorway, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then during the heightened point of like the worship, when the pastor, so the youth pastor then, who was like the leader of our group, um,
Mm-hmm.
he would like say like the sinner's prayer, and whoever, like
Yeah.
wants to give their life to Christ, just go through the door. And then the students would go through the door. And then, the next month in the youth group, there'd be more people, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
they'd gone through the door, they'd been saved, et cetera, et cetera. And then going into this concert, I'm like, interesting, how
Mm.
the right combination of chords and
Mm-hmm.
emotion swelling and kind of like a collective emotive somatic experience leads people to kind of like a height or kind
Yeah.
of like a climax in their bodies, like
Mm-hmm.
an ethereal experience or like a spiritual experience. And I started to
Yeah.
become curious about the brain and like what
Mm.
happens when we have environments where we have some semblance of control over
Mm-hmm.
these people, right? Just like a
Mm-hmm.
concert. That's how my favorite example to explain this these days is, just go to a Taylor Swift concert.
Yeah.
The same kind of like ecstasy and, like buzz. And of course, Taylor
Mm-hmm.
Swift is right there.
Mm-hmm.
Could be, in a way, similar to the experience you're having with a worship team and knowing that Jesus, Holy
Yeah.
Spirit is like coming down. So I became curious about the brain. And that
Mm.
kind of led me to, I also did a couple of months trying to go to ministry school, right? And being like immersed like in how to study the Bible. But it was more of
Mm.
like a very it was more of like Christian apologetics with all of these presuppositions. Like you go there
Mm.
to confirm what you already are supposed to believe rather than
Mm-hmm.
testing the belief.
Mm.
So
Okay.
studying biology, studying the brain,
Yeah.
studying like the effect of like somatic inquiry and all of that in the
Mm-hmm.
body, ministry school, I just became immensely curious about where all of these ideas came from, how we got
Mm.
here. And that led me to, like what people call deconstruction. And it's a scary word
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people, but all it really means is like examining what components made up what you state as your beliefs, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
did that with Christianity. I did that with Catholicism. I did that with religion in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's how, like in a span of like 10 years, so I got married when I was 28, right? So in like 10 years. And also like in um conversation with the man who became my husband, right?
Yeah.
Um kind of like finding people who, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm not just
Mm.
thinking this and making this up in my head. I started to also find the deconstruction community, people who,
Mm-hmm.
I think what people think about the deconstruction communities are just a bunch of atheists or progressive
Mm.
Christians. They're really not,
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
deconstruction is as varied and wide, it's such a wide range, right? And not everybody's
Yeah.
there to go out there and sin, right? Because I
Mm-hmm.
didn't I didn't do that. I didn't go out there and become a hedonist, right? I got
Mm-hmm.
married. I got married.
Yeah.
I started a
Mm-hmm.
family right away. And so
Yeah.
I think you could call my deconstruction like a gentle dismantling and dissolving
Mm-hmm.
of those fear structures that I had unintentionally produced in my own body
Mm.
and in my brain that controlled the perception I was having. And, I now that I understand biology and that we actually do everything adaptively, I don't blame, my parents for, some people are like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, my parents, they didn't understand. And I'm like, well, if you look at their biology and their brain, um, why would it have made sense that they brought the three of us, because I have two other brothers, the three
Mm-hmm.
of us into this religion? It's because
Yeah.
they actually believed, oh, biblical parenting, and this is how to
Mm-hmm.
spare our children, from like the world, the secular
Yeah.
world, right? Because that was really huge in the 80s and the 90s, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was the
Yeah.
paradigm. So
Mm-hmm.
when it came to our own family, it was more of like, okay, I've done a lot of work. I think I will
Mm.
always be examining the beliefs that I hold. It's like a part of me now. And I think it's become a very well-rounded way to live. I
Mm.
think if God created us to have free will, do we really test that? Do we really step into that belief that we hold, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do we really believe, like, especially as a woman, kind of like Edith Stein has a quote like, a woman's soul is fashioned as a shelter in which other
Mm-hmm.
souls may unfold. Like, that's my child, my future
Yeah.
children. So
Mm-hmm.
we always got taught in the evangelical world, like the man is like the spiritual head of the home, but it's actually
Mm-hmm.
the woman. It's the
Mm.
woman's soul that is fashioned, as a
Yeah.
shelter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I found that in discussing this with my husband, he's like, my husband's always kind of like been an agnostic Christian, right? He still
Mm-hmm.
holds those fundamental beliefs and qualities. Maybe you could call it stoicism, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he's like, I don't really know if I believe
Mm.
that there is like a one true God. And I'm like, I don't,
Mm-hmm.
and he's like, I don't need to know. But the fact
Mm-hmm.
that you can have the spaciousness, me, to explore that and still
Mm-hmm.
be with me, that says a lot about like how you believe in God. And I think
Yeah.
it shocks a lot of women that I am
Mm.
married to a man who
Mm-hmm.
became an agnostic during our
Mm-hmm.
marriage. But it's honestly, again, like describing that feminine receptivity, again, that woman's
Mm-hmm.
soul that is a
Yeah.
shelter for others, because he still has a soul, even if he doesn't believe he has one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that is for me, like what you talk about, true feminine receptivity as
Mm-hmm.
a genuine capacity of the human being, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, I
Yeah.
don't know where I went off tangent there, but like I hope that explained kind of,
Yeah.
the worldview that I have right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so good. I'm curious, what about Catholicism began to
Mm,
feel like home, or like this is where I want to
yeah.
build?
Yeah. So this answer is not going to make people happy. Okay. Okay. So I grew up like I said, I grew up inside of the height of purity culture, right? The height
Mm-hmm.
of it. Like when that book came out, and this was also the era of, I don't know if they still show it, 700 Club, this
Mm.
show where a lot of like focus on the family was always
Mm-hmm.
featured. So I grew up in a very
Yeah.
fear-based,
Mm-hmm.
anti-flesh, sometimes anti-biology view that God had of human beings. So
Yeah.
when I came to, I think it was 1997, yeah, 1997, we went to World Youth Day in Paris.
Wow.
And it was, yeah, and it was around the time that John Paul, now Saint John Paul,
Mm-hmm.
was speaking to the youth, not about, so in America on Capitol Hill, they were doing like, true love waits and, all those campaigns where they were filling up the malls with guys and girls who were vowing to be virgins. But like
Mm-hmm.
in World Youth Day, so I was 19 at the time,
Mm.
and I decided to go because the parish that was in the neighborhood was organizing kind of like a pilgrimage there. And I thought, well, that
Mm-hmm.
would be fun. And it's still
Yeah.
Christian. I don't know about these
Mm-hmm.
Catholics, because, they're kind of like the whore of Babylon or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
because, I
Yep.
mean, jokes aside, there were some evangelical, maybe there are still now, that see the Catholic Church as like the whore of Babylon, like
Yeah.
in Revelation or whatever. But
Yeah.
anyway, I went there and there was just so much community and acceptance. And I'm like, these are
Hmm.
kids from all over the world
Yeah.
trying to figure life out. And it was
Mm-hmm.
during the second day where there was a talk on like the theology of the body, right? So
Mm.
understand, I was
Yeah.
19. This book
Mm-hmm.
had just, come out, right?
Mm-hmm.
This culture was so like deeply embedded. And then that was the first
Mm-hmm.
time I like saw literature and actually an entire body of work and connection of the body
Mm.
to the sacred. Like, and John
Yeah.
Paul, like, so exquisitely, like established it in that
Mm-hmm.
writing. So that was a particular
Yeah.
moment for me that purity culture is not Christianity. It's a
Mm-hmm.
movement, but Christianity and the anthropological aspect of Christianity goes all the way back to creation,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I was living inside of maybe 50 years of modern evangelical history.
Yeah.
And it
Mm-hmm.
was like swimming in a pool, in a kiddie pool inside of an ocean, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yes,
kind of
yeah.
I realized that I didn't have to make my disappointment in a subculture into a disappointment with the entire body of Christ and
Mm.
the human being
Yeah.
that is in Christ, right? So
Yeah.
that was the moment. Like I said, my deconstruction was already beginning there. So
Mm-hmm.
when we got married, we fortunately got married, not in, some and nothing, not that there's anything wrong with it, but we got married inside of like the sacrament of matrimony.
Mm.
We
Yeah.
had um, a very wonderful friend who was still a friend, a spiritual director, priest, who
Mm-hmm.
flew all the way from Australia to marry us. He also
Mm.
married my siblings as well.
Wow.
But basically, that was very healing for me. That I didn't need
Mm.
fear-based motivation to be a
Yeah.
Christian. I
Yeah.
didn't need to
Mm-hmm.
distrust my body to be a
Yeah.
Christian. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't like what I loved about TOB was it it gave our responsibility back to each of our sexes so
Mm-hmm.
that a female is never responsible for like male lust or like anything
Mm-hmm.
like that. That
Yeah.
allowed me to approach marriage, like for instance, like chastity as like integration rather than fear.
Mm-hmm.
You could say in evangelical language, I saved myself for marriage. Like, that's very
Mm-hmm.
evangelical language. But when
Yeah.
you put it in the light of like what the body is, it's like it's an
Mm-hmm.
integration, right? It
Yeah.
is it's a part of the incarnation of your new self that you become when you
Mm-hmm.
get married, right?
Yeah.
So um that brought me hope. And of course, as I had children, I
Mm-hmm.
learned in my own body, like biology isn't opposed to holiness. My
Yeah.
body is the place where this holiness, this soul, again, going back to that quote about the woman being um, like the shelter for souls, right?
Mm-hmm.
My body is just like Mary's body was,
Yeah.
right? It does not, like the grace of God does not, I'm remembering another quote, like the grace of God doesn't destroy nature. So
Mm-hmm.
this, it perfects it,
Yeah.
right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what's become like the foundation of, even the work that I do,
Yeah.
um, which is what I call like a whole person type of faith.
Mm-hmm.
It's faith that involves the nervous system and hormones and menstrual cycle, and,
Yeah.
emotions, intellect, prayer, all of those things,
Mm-hmm.
because God created nature, because God
Yeah.
created biology, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. That was big for me too. Um, just discovering God in creation.
Yeah.
And that's something that I had a deep longing for as a teen and a kid. And I just naturally felt it, but grew up in a more non denominational culture as well.
Yeah.
And so I struggled to find a place for it.
Yeah.
Um, and then it was also theology of the body for me that really, I mean, first it
Right?
was learning about sacraments because
Yeah.
they're similar where it's like, okay, here's the created thing and here's the grace coming through it.
Yes,
And that we can
exactly.
experience God in that. And then
Yeah.
with theology of the body and that expanding to our bodies and creation as a whole. And really, it's just incarnational, right? Like Christ,
Incarnation.
God came
Yes.
to us,
Mm-hmm.
entered creation. We're not trying to escape the created
Correct.
world.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that definitely resonates with me too. I
Yeah.
experienced
Isn't it
something
freeing to
similar.
leave that
Hmm.
rigidity, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
not end up in another type of rigidity, which is why I
Yeah.
love your work, the way that you give
Mm.
language to the it is complex. You know, the range of femininity is complexity. There's a metaphysical aspect, and there is
Mm-hmm.
like a physical, like incarnation of it
Mm-hmm.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, do you, what would you say to somebody who is maybe in that moment where they're struggling with their kind of purity culture
Mm,
upbringing or environment, recognizing that some things feel off, but
mm-hmm.
not sure how to step out of it and where to go, and if it's anti Christian to do so, if you're working
Right.
against God, if it's sinful, you know, all those things.
Mm-hmm.
What would you kind of say to somebody in that situation?
Yeah. So I would say like that's the art of not swinging to an opposite like extreme, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I can say about um well maybe the kind of community that I was in that kind of like evangelical Christianity, fundamentalist, yeah, I want to say the fundamentalist type of
Mm-hmm.
evangelical Christianity. Um the tendency there is to swing so far into the opposite of what we perceived we
Yeah.
didn't have. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a rigid kind of like swinging to the opposite. So from having lack of control, people start worshiping ultimate, you know, like I have full autonomy, nothing's
Mm-hmm.
wrong, nothing, there's no moral limit to anything, you know, like,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like I mean, I'm not a therapist, but that's what therapists would say could qualify as a trauma response,
Mm-hmm.
right? To adopt this, like everything is equally beneficial. It
Yeah.
really is not, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
neither extreme leads to integration. So I think I would
Yeah.
say to these people who are exploring this and maybe and it's very, by the way, nobody wants to deconstruct. It's not something
Mm-hmm.
that you wake up, I think I'm going to deconstruct today.
Yeah.
People do not want to deconstruct. They
Yeah.
don't want to like examine and question their beliefs. It's devastating, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Um, but I would say that if that is something you're exploring, I want to say that you're actually not looking for less Christianity, but you're looking for
Mm-hmm.
more
Yeah.
reality. You're looking
Yeah.
for, does this make me more truthful? Does this
Mm-hmm.
make me more embodied, responsible,
Mm-hmm.
actually free, actually closer to
Yeah.
Christ? So when I say something like biological femininity, which I say all the time because it's a part of my work, and I know this is close to how you also explore femininity from like meta level, right? We never mean to change your behavior just so that you can
Mm-hmm.
fit into you know, like some archetype that you feel is a correction of what you were previously living in, right?
Yeah.
Like I've seen
Mm-hmm.
this in so I've seen this in like a lot of like let's say new age women, you know, women who didn't
Mm-hmm.
grow up in evangelical Christianity, but grew up more of like, you know, woo woo, spiritual, but not
Mm-hmm.
religious, that
Yeah.
sort of thing. And some of them tell me, like, I wish I'd grown up a Christian. Like, I wish I'd grown up
Mm.
like a biblical Christian. And I'm like, but women who grew up in biblical Christianity, you know, have just as many questions and just as
Mm-hmm.
much confusion. So it's not really about what you want to be. You know, female biology shapes experience.
Yeah.
What are you experiencing that is telling you, I need to ask deeper questions, right? So
Mm-hmm.
look, this is why I invite women to look at their menstrual cycle, right? When
Mm-hmm.
you are thinking about your experience as a woman, look at your menstrual cycle. Are you cramping? Are
Mm-hmm.
you bleeding heavily? Do you skip your bleed, right? And
Mm-hmm.
people ask, why would you start there? And I'm like, because when God created woman, right? He created her like with this organ, and this organ actually shapes the monthly experience that we have
Mm-hmm.
of, you know, like the possibility to bring life. And so everything that has to do with being a female is basically hinted at through the symptoms you have in your cycle. Of course, it's different when you're
Yeah.
pregnant, you don't have a cycle, but you have hormonal rhythms,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have stress levels. You have how you're looking at your man or not
Mm-hmm.
interested in him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Female biology shapes experience. So um, I invite women to that level of awareness of their bodies. And
Yeah.
usually, I would say 99% of the time that I have held the space for women deconstructing beliefs without necessarily wanting to deny a belief in God, I've
Mm-hmm.
found that it always has a connection to the quality of their
Mm.
cycle, to the
Wow.
kinds of symptoms that they are having. Like maybe they
Yeah.
have gut issues. I'm not a doctor, okay, but
Mm-hmm.
when we look at symptoms, we always see that there is kind of like an emotional root
Mm-hmm.
to the symptomology. And that's another framework that I use to kind of like examine what's happening in a woman's biology called German
Mm-hmm.
New Medicine, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a modality. It's simply a way to look at how specific organs and brain regions respond hormonally,
Mm.
respond in terms of symptoms to what that woman is experiencing. So I
Mm-hmm.
found that a lot of women who um, grew up like in purity culture, for instance, they tend to have spasms, numbness, vaginal
Mm.
numbness when they
Mm-hmm.
get married, right? Like, why is that?
Yeah.
It's because
Mm-hmm.
the female biology is shaped by her experience. If she grew up
Yeah.
thinking sex is dirty and then you're supposed to just like
Mm-hmm.
turn it on, on your honeymoon,
Mm-hmm.
that's not how it works. There
Yeah.
are
Mm-hmm.
deeper layers. So, ignorance, ignoring things, ignoring signals never produces courage. They always
Mm-hmm.
produce fear. Understanding them does. And when you can understand that
Yeah.
God's design is actually already governing your body, there's just been a
Mm-hmm.
disconnect because of ideas, ideologies. Then when we make
Mm-hmm.
that connection again, the body actually relaxes. The
Yeah.
body actually stabilizes. The
Yeah.
body, and specifically your cycle and all of those other things that are going on, they
Mm-hmm.
stabilize, they become integrated, just
Mm-hmm.
like your
Mm-hmm.
belief becomes integrated. And you're no longer living in this belief of, am I going to die? And, when Jesus comes like through the clouds, am I going to be left behind? Which is a whole other,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was like 10 years old, right?
Yeah.
Um, you know, I would like, did God take my parents, when I was left
Mm-hmm.
behind, right?
Yeah.
But I know it sounds silly, but these are the things. These are
Yeah,
the
very
things
much
that
so.
we
Mm-hmm.
allow ourselves to examine and really look
Yeah.
at and kind of like break down into
Mm-hmm.
digestible pieces of, is this true? Is this bringing me closer to Christ? Is this
Mm-hmm.
dividing me from myself? Is this
Yeah.
making me more free?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's where I'd begin.
Mm-hmm. A big shift happened for me when I learned that Christianity upholds that your body and soul are one, and that your
Yeah,
body, your soul animates your body.
yeah,
Because all of those sort of intuitions I'd had growing up and what you're describing of you're going to see your beliefs and your experiences reflected in your body, it really just I was like, oh, okay, this is Christian. It's not New Age. It's not
yeah.
hippie. It's actually reality,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I just found it so life changing. I had a moment in I think I was in grade 12, similar with you, where it started with the brain. I
Yeah,
was fascinated with how our brains can affect our performance and
yeah.
how you could your beliefs essentially of what you can do are going to affect what you then accomplish. And I was obsessed with the fact or with like thinking about, okay, if I believe I can jump from here to there because I've done it before, my
Mm-hmm.
body's just going to do it. And I
Yeah,
was so fascinated by that, even though it's one of those things that maybe you're thinking a little too hard about, but I
yeah.
was just very, very fascinated with. And it led me ultimately to theology of the body, but it sort of
Mm,
started in the place of psychology and like trying to figure out,
yeah,
I can tell we're connected, but what I need language for this.
yeah. Yeah.
And so being able to find that in the deepest sense in Christianity was so
Yeah.
liberating and cool,
Yeah.
and really drove home what you're saying of like, our bodies aren't the problem. Our
Yeah.
biology isn't the problem. And being able to find that freedom without having to swing to the other extreme of I'm just going to do whatever I want, because
Yeah.
that also affects your biology and it's probably not going to fix
Totally.
things.
Yeah, because
um,
remember, our biology simply interprets the context and
yeah.
identity that we hold, and that's in the psyche, and that's the other thing that I didn't have access to
Mm-hmm.
in the particular kind of evangelical Christianity that I was living inside of, because it
Yeah.
was a kind of camp where, oh, everything's evil, college is evil,
Mm-hmm.
universities are demonic,
Mm-hmm.
psychology is evil, like all of
Yeah.
these, it gave everything such a black or white, very
Yeah.
fear-based lens, right? So
Yeah.
I think
Mm-hmm.
one of the most amazing or interesting contributions that TOB, or Theology of the Body, has made for me is that it doesn't replace psychology, but it gives
Yeah.
psychology a larger, more
Mm-hmm.
expanded horizon than just the
Yeah.
science. Like I was
Yeah.
listening to a podcast last night, the science, the science, the science. Well, science never makes any truth claims. It's just an
Mm-hmm.
examination, it's just
Mm-hmm.
always shifting. So when we can see that, like our bodies can be examined by science, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there is something mystical and mysterious about the body that will
Yeah.
never be able to be explained by science alone. It can
Mm-hmm.
involve it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it can never, you can never have empirical evidence across the board for 100 people who had the exact same experience of God. It's
Mm-hmm.
just not possible, right? So
Yeah.
the body is not just I like to say the body's not just a container or like a suit for the
Mm-hmm.
soul. Right? The body isn't incidental to who you are. The body reveals the
Yeah.
person that is,
Mm-hmm.
inhabits that soul that God gave them. So
Mm-hmm.
if I grew up in like a dualism of like my spirit loves God, but my body always gets in the way of loving God,
Mm-hmm.
right? That,
Yeah.
that's what gave me the adaptations that I
Mm-hmm.
had. Um, and, the symptoms that I was having, because
Yeah.
I wasn't able to, again, there's like a disharmony in my brain. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
no connection to that, right? But
Yeah.
when I started to see that the human body, again, is that unity of body,
Mm-hmm.
soul, and spirit, you know, um, it gave shape to psychology, right?
Yeah.
So psychology, it explores, how this person is formed, but theology brings in like, what is this embodied person for?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's like,
Yeah.
then you're not just like, like a soul inhabiting like a meat suit,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's so much more like love coded, purpose
Yeah.
coded, right? If that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. Do you have anything maybe specific about like purity culture versus an integrated view of the person?
Mm.
What beliefs, what it might look like maybe some examples of some beliefs that like maybe you held before. You've already talked a little bit, but what would be the sort of resolved belief or the integrated belief that you've kind of found yourself in?
Okay. So purity culture. So first of all, I should mention that even the term purity culture is in itself an ethic.
Mm-hmm.
So Christians living inside of purity culture don't say that they're in purity culture.
Yeah.
Okay, it's
Mm-hmm.
an observation from the outside looking in, from the
Yeah.
outside of where people who were products of that theology were able to
Mm-hmm.
speak into the symptoms that they experienced, the PTSD that they had, et cetera, et cetera. So
Mm-hmm.
purity culture it would ask, or it probably still does, like, how do I stay like pure?
Mhm.
And pure is a specific connotation in purity culture. It means you haven't had sex before marriage and
Mhm.
you haven't even thought of
Mhm.
sex, right?
Yeah.
So in purity culture, you're not even supposed to speak to your fiance about like when you're gonna have sex on your wedding night, because
Mhm.
that gives room for like the
Yeah.
devil to like fill his body with lust and you to
Mhm.
get tempted, right? So purity culture was often very brittle about like sexual purity.
Yeah.
When we get into um like the TOB, which is
Mhm.
basically Christian anthropology, right?
Mhm.
Um, the question that we ask ourselves when we're like, let's say we're two committed people committed to each other, exploring marriage, right? Like when you're looking at that other person, it's like, how do I become a whole and entire woman, a whole and entire man who is capable of loving that person in the way that Christ wants me to love him or her?
Mhm.
It's a totally different question
Yeah.
than just, oh,
Mhm.
how far can I go? Can I put my arm around him,
Mhm.
or can I give her a
Mhm.
side hug, or frontal
Mhm.
hugs? Oh, because your breasts are touching, so it's totally different. Like there's
Yeah.
no
Mhm.
fear coded in every step and every thought that you're trying to
Yeah. Mhm.
that you just navigate like as a person. So purity culture
Mhm.
often focused on behavior modification. Don't have
Yeah.
sex. Don't even think about sex. Don't
Mhm.
don't dress in a way to tempt others, as if like that was your intention. One of the things that
Mhm.
was I've shared in public anyway, but one of the weird things that I had to do when I was around 20 years old was dress up like a man, more like a man.
Mm.
Don't dress up in
Yeah.
the dresses because there are a couple guys like in the youth ministry who have crushes on you. And when
Mm.
they think of you like in a dress, they're probably thinking about your legs and your butt.
Mm.
And I'm like, in my innocence, I was like, okay,
Yeah.
sure. But then the
Mhm.
other part of me that was deconstructing, I'm like, that's kind of misogynistic and a little bit,
Yeah.
like, you know,
Mhm.
um, unfair, right? So
Yeah.
purity culture was obsessed with controlling behavior, and it
Yeah.
did not allow us to feel the agency that we have. So there was chronic
Mhm.
shame. I was always afraid of like the looks of men, and these men
Mhm.
were my friends, like in the youth group, right?
Yeah.
It's like it like encourages like self-abandonment and
Mhm.
anxiousness, right? So
Yeah.
you have like a woman who's a shell of obeying the rules, but she's
Mhm.
not integrated in her body. So a more
Yeah.
integrated view, again, when grace governs things, it's how am I moving in love for myself
Mhm.
or for my neighbor?
Yeah.
It's a very different question. How
Yeah.
can I, so Catholics have a concept of occasion of sin, right?
Mhm.
And you could say that occasion of sin is where would I have the likelihood of missing the mark with
Mhm.
my like my sexual autonomy. So
Mhm.
what wearing, I know wearing this dress, does not make me like a whore or, like
Mhm.
a temptress, right?
Mhm.
Um, but if I knowing about like the biology of men, right?
Mhm.
If I know that, they are predicated to like look, would I
Mhm.
be comfortable at a man looking at me? It's not about
Mhm.
him, it's about me. Would I be
Yeah.
comfortable about him looking at me,
Mhm.
making eyes at me? Because if it doesn't feel good to me, then why would I be putting this dress on that's cut to about
Yeah.
here?
Mhm.
So these are
Mhm.
questions of maturity. It's not like
Mm.
outsourcing like responsibility to the guy. That's a
Yeah.
big thing in purity culture. Oh, you're responsible for the lust of man. No, you're
Mhm.
responsible for looking at yourself in the mirror. If I wear this dress, I know objectively that men look for signals of fertility, for signals
Mhm.
of like virility, right? And so breasts and eyes and lips, they're going to call
Mhm.
attention, whether we are
Mhm.
Christian or not, right? So
Yeah.
how do I feel stepping out
Yeah.
in this dress, in the kind of
Mhm.
body that I have? Do I want people to look at me a certain way? Very
Yeah.
different question, right? So
Mhm.
purity culture is about dismantling how we have compartmentalized people, right?
Yeah.
Integrated, um, like autonomy of the body is
Mhm.
recognizing I am one person. My body's not the enemy. Other people are not the enemy to me, but my body
Mhm.
is mine. I am the
Yeah.
steward of my body, and my
Mhm.
sexuality is part of
Mhm.
my vocation to love another person.
Yeah.
We know that most people are going to be interested in having
Mhm.
a relationship. You have
Mhm.
there are certain people who are not. They don't have that part of their nature to be sexually
Mhm.
attracted, right? So integration says in our bodies that love for neighbor is the goal. That's
Yeah.
it. You know,
Mhm.
Catherine of Siena said, "Be who God meant you to be, and
Mhm.
you will set the world on fire." It's about you. It's
Yeah.
about you responding to how God formed you to be. If you want to
Mhm.
be, it's about how do I avoid men sinning? That's not your responsibility.
Yeah.
How
Mhm.
do I become the woman, that
Mhm.
is fully connected to her body, that
Yeah.
knows I know that this is the kind of world that we live in. Men are not there like just looking at us on a meat hook, but
Mhm.
that is a part of their biology to look for
Mhm.
signals of fertility. So if we can leave that where it belongs, right? And then we can
Mhm.
look to ourselves as, okay, I'm putting on this dress, I'm being modest, right?
Mhm.
Not because I'm responsible for the lusts of men, but because how do I want to feel when I go out
Yeah.
there? How
Mhm.
do am I comfortable with people looking at me a certain way? What
Mhm.
would God have me do? And people sometimes ask, oh, what would Jesus do if you were in a tank
Mhm.
top? Jesus wouldn't do anything, right?
Yeah.
You would have
Mhm.
the reaction. You would have,
Mhm.
like the inclinations. So I
Yeah.
don't think the opposite of purity culture is like promiscuity. I don't think, to heal from purity culture, you should go have a
Yeah.
bunch of sex and,
Mhm.
like that
Yeah.
will heal it. No, Jesus
Mhm.
didn't make us to be rule followers, right? He
Mhm.
came to restore wholeness, like the whole person.
Yeah. Mhm.
Chastity is not something we do just because, we don't want to be sexual. It's about
Mhm.
integrating for a time the
Mhm.
kind of person who can give total love, total freedom,
Yeah.
total devotion to another in union.
Mhm.
And yes, for the purpose of procreation, right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I don't know if that gave you an example,
Mhm.
but like that's how
Yeah.
I teach women when it comes to like the modesty piece
Yeah.
to really dismantle. Okay, so first of all, those are men. They are responsible for their thoughts, how they
Mhm.
look at women, their own misogyny, their own,
Yeah.
red pill view of women being trash,
Mhm.
right? You're not responsible for that. You're responsible for how you hold yourself. And
Yeah.
when you're
Mhm.
rooted in that identity and it's
Mhm.
built on God, nobody can take that from you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Would you use the language ever of like um in discovering the goodness of your body
Mm,
and the mystery of it and
mm-hmm,
the power that it has
mm-hmm,
to, as you said, become mature in that and steward it well,
mm-hmm,
rather than it's bad, it's wrong, we must hide it,
mm-hmm,
we must cover it, we must control it
mm.
and make it kind of disappear so that nobody stumbles. But sort of the opposite, where it's so good, we want
Yeah,
to steward it and care for it well.
yeah. I think maturity comes with um this sense of so first of all, it's dismantling those ideas that were installed for you to fear your body. Okay.
Mhm.
Body as a threat, body as an idol. Because,
Mhm.
for a long time, that's how we were, at least speaking from the kind of evangelical church that I was in. Like the body's a threat,
Mhm.
be careful, control
Mhm.
it, it's not to be trusted, right?
Yeah.
And then they're swinging to the other side of the body is the idol, like
Mhm.
your body defines the truth. Neither of
Mhm.
that is a Christian or Christ-like vision of the
Mhm.
body, right?
Mhm.
When we're talking about God in the body, right?
Mhm.
You're talking about being a steward of what God has given you, right?
Yeah.
The
Mhm.
body does tell the truth, our instincts tell the truth, but
Mhm.
not the whole truth.
Mhm.
It doesn't, like, the body speaks in symptoms, it speaks in instinct, but it doesn't speak by itself, if that makes
Mhm.
sense,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So we have, for instance, we have attraction, we
Mhm.
have fear, we have sadness, we have grief, we have stress, we feel
Mhm.
hunger, we feel tiredness or fatigue, um we feel danger. We also
Mhm.
experience virility for men, fertility for women, right? All of these
Mhm.
are signals, right?
Yeah.
And when we experience these signals, we need discernment. So if
Mhm.
you're feeling fatigue and you're feeling tiredness, then you would ask, okay, like, what is this symptom telling me? Is
Mhm.
it telling me to rest? Is it telling me to get, like, checked? Is it telling me
Mhm.
to kind of like slow down a little? So these signals are bids of information.
Yeah.
Having wisdom helps us to interpret it, because one person might, like, their own symptoms give them fear.
Mhm.
People who are like, every pain means that they're going to die, right?
Mhm.
How does that kind of like speak into how they are perceiving God, right?
Yeah.
Or every impulse of attraction means I got to go pursue that person, or I
Mhm.
got to go, like, be all seductive to that
Mhm.
person. Like, that's
Yeah.
not entirely true. The body gives information, our instincts respond to it, but we need to have wisdom
Mhm.
to interpret it. So maturity is about curiosity.
Hmm.
It's about asking, what does this mean,
Mhm.
right? What
Mhm.
is this revealing about how I'm looking at this situation?
Mhm.
Is this revealing a wound? Is it
Yeah.
revealing, like, I need some nutrients? Is
Mhm.
this revealing a genuine moral decision that I have?
Mhm.
That's a much more mature awareness of your body,
Yeah.
right? Than
Mhm.
just good or bad, hell
Mhm.
or heaven,
Mhm.
I mean, like, I know it's a broken record, but we always like to say that Jesus had a human body that experienced hunger, and
Mhm.
he would go away and be alone. He
Mhm.
would cry. He would, there are many instances of him touching people, healing
Mhm.
people, right?
Yeah.
But his incarnation didn't make biology the ultimate thing, right?
Yeah.
It
Mhm.
made it relevant
Mhm.
to the divine,
Mhm.
right? So approaching your body with maturity and with faith, right, means that you can talk about bodily functions. You can talk about your
Mhm.
nervous system. You can talk about somatic awareness without
Mhm.
feeling that these somehow are competing with the creator.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
Um, that's a great segue into a lot of your content and your work. You're kind of focused on biological femininity, and I
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
love to explore that a
Sure.
bit more and hear maybe just to
Yeah.
start, like, what do you mean by that? And yeah, we'll just start there.
Yeah. So biological femininity is not my language. So
Mm-hmm.
um and when I say that, I mean that it belongs in that area of study that I call German New Medicine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also it touches on evolutionary biology, which is
Mm-hmm.
the study of how male and female evolve, like, in
Yeah.
terms of historically, in terms of, like, psychologically. Okay. So it's a study
Mm-hmm.
of, you could say, biological femininity is the study of how being female shapes our experience. So when
Hmm.
you're born a female, again, and this is kind of like the basis of it. When you're born a female, every impulse, every action, every um experience serves one primal purpose, And that's when you're of age, it's safe enough for you to get pregnant, right? Like if you're
Mhm.
born female, you carry life. So I
Mhm.
always remind women that biological femininity is simply understanding that your stress levels,
Mhm.
your nervous system state, like maybe your high cortisol, right?
Mhm.
Or your sense of loneliness and kind of like, I don't have a protector and a provider. Like
Mhm.
all of that at the fundamental level is dictated by, am I safe to one day have a baby? Right.
Mhm.
So that's what I mean. It's not about reducing women to like hormones and everything, but it's really like
Yeah.
everything that has to do on the surface, right, is even
Mhm.
for young girls. Like I have an 11-year-old daughter. She is not
Mhm.
thinking about having a baby, but her
Mhm.
sense of safety, her sense of identity as a female, her sense of belonging as a female, underlying all of that is, will I be safe to get pregnant one day?
Yeah. Mhm.
Is my safety to become pregnant one day taken care
Mhm.
of, right? And so
Yeah.
female biology examines things like menstrual cycles. So part
Mhm.
of my work is helping women to kind of like trace the history from when they started their period up to what
Mhm.
their period looks like now. Because
Very
the
cool.
age that you start your period, for instance, dictates how safe you were when you were a
Mm.
child, right?
Yeah.
So let's say some children have been having their periods earlier. That could mean, not always, but again, when you're examining things biologically, you have to look at the individual. All of
Mhm.
it turns out to be anecdotal, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
But what it means is that, okay, maybe when she was 8 years old, let's say she's kind of like a left-handed girl, left brain dominant girl. That meant that she resolved some what we call sexual conflicts, the conflict of not feeling safe to be a female. She
Mhm.
resolved a bunch of that before she turned 9. And then when she's
Mm.
9 years old, she gets her period because
Mm.
why would your body give you your period? It's when you feel safe enough to have that
Mm.
monthly cycle. And I know,
Yeah.
it's too much to absorb in one lesson like this, but
Mhm.
basically that's what we examine. We examine,
Mhm.
okay, what has been her monthly cycle? At what age did she get it? What were the
Mhm.
conditions of her youth that shaped the
Yeah.
kind of her lens of biology and femininity from a biological
Mhm.
perspective? I also
Yeah.
look at birth,
Mhm.
if someone was breastfed, if they intend to breastfeed. I look at
Mhm.
hormones. I look at mate selection, so how they have chosen partners.
Mhm.
These are all the components of like biological femininity. So
Cool.
basically all the ways that safety and connection influence the female form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So essentially, it's seeing um, just the fact that you are female.
Yeah.
Your body is organized a certain way
Yeah.
towards procreation, whether or not you
Yeah.
ever
Decide to
actually,
procreate or not. Yeah.
yeah, procreate. That
Yeah.
is what your body is doing
Mm-hmm.
all the time. It's ordered towards that. And
Yeah.
it's not necessarily about our desires or our state in life or our
Yeah.
vocation, but it's just the very foundation of our body and
Correct.
biology.
Yeah.
Okay, and
Yeah.
like
So
how we experience the world. It's through that lens, whether we know it or
exactly.
not.
Whether we know it or
Cool.
not. So that means that
Mhm.
even if a woman decides to never have a baby, right?
Mhm.
Let's say, there's some women who they don't want to have children, don't like children, never thought
Mhm.
of like wanting to have children. We can, through the examination of biological femininity,
Mhm.
locate a time in her bodily history where something happened that made it unsafe to
Yeah.
even think of being a mother. And so, in a
Mhm.
way, her brain and her perception adapted to protect her, to prevent
Yeah.
her from the
Mhm.
interest of procreation. I
Mhm.
have aunts like that. They're fabulous. They like travel the world. They're very genuine. I know like some people are like, oh, those women could never be happy. She is genuinely happy that she
Mhm.
doesn't have children, right? And that's her brain. That's her adaptation, right? Some
Yeah.
women, they do feel safe to have babies, have a family,
Mhm.
and procreate, right?
Yeah.
Neither are right or wrong. It's just
Mhm.
this is how God intelligently designed the body.
Yeah.
Everybody has a unique adaptation. We could even
Mhm.
go into, people who are on the spectrum, right?
Mhm.
Um, the lens through which I teach biology doesn't look at that pathologically. People
Mm.
who have adaptive behaviors have gifts that other people who don't have that
Mm.
adaptation don't
Yeah.
have. So biology isn't about, I'll go back, I'll rewind. Biological femininity isn't about being like the perfect woman,
Yeah.
like with the right brand of beauty and the right,
Mhm.
like soft girl era
Mhm.
vibe or trad wife vibe. These are all tropes. These are all
Yeah.
layers given to us by culture.
Mhm.
Biological femininity is basically, okay, is my body safe to
Mhm.
be a woman, right?
Mhm.
So when I study biology with women, their personal biology, they're not asking, they think they're asking me this, but they're not. How do I become more feminine?
Yeah.
They end up asking, how did God design my unique female body? What has been the
Mhm.
journey of this body? So that instead
Yeah.
of fighting my symptoms, I can understand why they're there. I can understand
Mhm.
why the cramps came in the first place when I was
Yeah.
14 and I wasn't chosen by my crush and he ended up choosing
Mhm.
my best friend. So biologically, I wasn't going to have his babies, right? And so my
Mhm.
body has been experiencing cramps since then. That's an example
Mhm.
of how I help a woman understand. And when she can make
Mm.
that connection, you know what? Sometimes those symptoms decrease or end
Mm.
up like lessening,
Yeah.
right?
Very
So
cool.
that's what makes
Yeah.
my work distinctive in this way. It
Mhm.
allows
Yeah.
women to explore how significant conflicts that have to do with being a woman are relating to like their bodily symptoms and how
Yeah.
to see so a lot of women start to feel like, oh, so I can't do anything, like I'm purposeless and
Mhm.
meaningless. I'm like, wait a minute, we are not just this body. This body
Mhm.
has gone through a journey. So what is
Mm.
God teaching you like about
Yeah.
the journey? So the goal is not
Yeah.
helping women to become more feminine according to the
Mhm.
cultural scripts, but to become integrated,
Yeah.
embodied, connected
Mhm.
to their bodies through a loving God
Yeah.
from a place of
Mhm.
like wholeness.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's something that drew me to you initially
Yeah.
because a lot of my work says the same thing, where it's like we're not actually trying to become more feminine. Like you are
I love
feminine.
I love your pieces. Like they're so you have a gift of language and
Mm,
being able to translate these ideas that are very meta and bringing it
mm,
like digestible to the women that need to hear it. So I
mm.
so admire
Wow.
that about you. Yeah.
Thank you. It's nice to hear.
Yeah.
You don't always know how you're communicating. So it's
Yeah.
always helpful to have feedback. But yeah, just like that idea of you don't need to become something, you
Hmm.
are already feminine.
Yeah.
But it's so
Yes.
funny because almost every woman I encounter, whether in my community or online, that's their first question. How do I become more feminine? Because we feel that reality of we're not integrated, something's not right.
Mm.
But then we look to these tropes, or I should be this, I should be that, maybe that's what's wrong. So if I just become that, it'll be
Yeah.
fixed. But it's
Yeah.
actually the opposite.
It's the opposite.
It's unlearning and stepping into who you are in particular, which is harder to do than just following a list of, okay, I got to
Mm-hmm.
be all these things.
Yeah.
So I love that you talk about that and that's such a big thing. But then you also give women a way to do that by looking at
Yeah.
their cycles and their biology and going, okay, let's just take the time to process this and
Yeah.
think about it and see what we can discover to help you connect with yourself and integrate these experiences and what your body's telling you. Um,
Correct.
I love that you have a practical way of doing that with women. That's very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I called it like finding like your map of meaning like in your body.
Mm-hmm.
So when I talk about like biological femininity, I'm not like you said, I'm not talking about giving women strategies or telling them this is how
Mhm.
you should speak or communicate. All
Mhm.
of those things actually become natural
Yeah.
when we understand the reality of what
Yeah.
the female body is. Like
Mhm.
our capacity for safety is always
Mhm.
connected to, could I, like be pregnant one day, right? Our
Mhm.
nervous system, our relationships also shape our biology. So sometimes I find that women ask you or me that question. And I think underlying that question really is a question of, how do I find belonging? How do I find
Mm.
love? How do I
Yeah.
find identity? Because when you're talking about a female, just like the female nature,
Mhm.
her primal imperative is to belong to someone, right?
Mhm.
Because without her being claimed by, let's say a male, she won't be able to have that birth. She won't be able to have
Mhm.
that baby. She won't be able to have something to love. So it's
Mhm.
ultimately a question about belonging, about becoming becoming love itself and giving birth
Mhm.
to what I will love. I know it's so meta and so like, sometimes philosophical, but
Mhm.
they're really asking also, why doesn't being feminine feel natural to me? And like
Yeah.
you said, because we've lived certain lives that have made us like disconnected, that have,
Mhm.
for some of us, it makes us chronically overgiving or
Mhm.
chronically hyper independent or chronically self-abandoning, especially,
Yeah.
in the kind of church that I grew up in, where
Mhm.
femininity was reduced to, modesty and
Yeah.
submission and purity culture. Like,
Mhm.
but then
Mhm.
also equally in um cultures that are, what we might call secular, where
Mhm.
femininity is dismissed as, "Oh, it's just for trad wives, it's just for
Yeah.
those that are colluding with the patriarchy," right? But
Mhm.
both
Mhm.
both leave women with that question that probably they come to you or me. And so they search you to, how do I become more feminine? But what we're
Mhm.
really asking is, how do I come home to myself before I learned all of these ideas?
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
So I always like to say femininity isn't a cosplay or a costume. It's
Yeah.
become a collection of things that we have
Mhm.
accumulated, that people have told us this is what it means to like be a woman. So
Yeah.
I think what people get to examine, like in your work, especially, is in your work first, it's like, what has covered like the natural way of being that God made me to be when
Mhm.
I was born, right? And for
Yeah.
me, like when somebody has lived through the kinds of traumas that my clients have lived through, the kind of like shame and people pleasing that they have lived through,
Mhm.
survival strategies become so familiar in their bodies that they think that that's who they are.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
This is what it means to be a biblical woman. Like I want to
Mhm.
marry like a biblical man. And I'm like, have you sat down and asked yourself like what that really means? Right.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
that's where, that's where I like theology of the body, because it asks, like,
Mhm.
who was I created to be?
Yeah.
You
Mhm.
know, let's start there. Like, who was
Mhm.
I created to be? So I don't think I help women to become more feminine. I think I
Mhm.
help women remove the obstacles and the
Yeah.
layers and
Mhm.
the ego structures that keep them from the woman which you
Mhm.
speak into that they already are.
Mhm.
Right. So that's why I
Yeah.
think your work resonates. You're not selling
Mm.
feminine persona. I think
Mhm.
both of us are inviting women to become more truthful, to
Mhm.
also not be scared to examine what has given us these ideas that think
Yeah.
that we can manufacture femininity,
Mhm.
right? But to
Yeah.
become integrated enough to hear, to listen, to
Mhm.
look at the journey of um how yes, how femininity ended up in this question for us,
Mhm.
and replace that fear and that wanting to perform and that wanting to
Yeah.
protect myself with, again, like with like God, give, I'm ready for the grace
Yeah.
that you
Mhm.
are freely giving to me to be a more
Mhm.
integrated, more at peace in my body, more embodied woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. Sometimes I joke that I don't really know how to market my content because I can't just sell the transformation of like, oh, follow me and you'll become more feminine. Because I'm like, that's not what I'm really trying to
No.
sell. Um, but
I actually
that's
don't
what
like it
people
when
kind of
people
expect.
I actually don't like it when some people say that about what they do,
Mm-hmm.
because we can
Yeah.
never really guarantee,
Yeah.
right? We
Mm-hmm.
can, what I like about your platform and why I enjoy it is you have a natural way of inviting women to self-examination, which is a
Mm-hmm.
lost art,
Mm.
honestly. You know, it's a lost art. And
Yeah.
I really admire how deeply you go into your work,
Mm.
because
Mm.
it's an example of how women ought to go that deeply into themselves.
Mm.
So you're embodying it, McKinley,
Wow.
in just by how you are being that expression of what you're genuinely passionate about. Like, I feel you're genuinely
Mm-hmm.
passionate about this. And
Hmm.
that is such an example for women to own for themselves without becoming egotistic, without becoming, this
Yeah.
is my brand. And I'm the only one who can talk
Mm-hmm.
about this, but becoming like
Mm-hmm.
that expression of receptivity, of
Mm.
inquiry, of curiosity. um,
Yeah.
I think you just going there and being the expression of what you produce, that's
Mm.
such a big witness already for how women can examine themselves. So, yeah, keep on doing that.
Ah, thank you. Such good feedback. Like I said, sometimes it's hard to know how you're coming across and what exactly, because I can pour things into it, but you don't know if it's going to come across. And there's also so much that I'm not even aware of. And so just hearing your feedback, it's so helpful and encouraging.
I mean
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Aw. If people want to get connected with you,
Yeah.
how can they do that?
Okay. So I took down my website because I'm at that place of I don't know what to do with it. So I have no
Mm-hmm.
website currently as of this recording, but you can find
Mm-hmm.
me on Instagram. So I'm at
Okay.
Feminine Womanhood.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I have something going on, like a program, usually
Mm-hmm.
like it's a little cohort of women, maybe around 12 of them. And we kind
Mm-hmm.
of like gather and study together
Yeah.
biological womanhood.
Mm-hmm.
As of this recording, I may open something up, after the summer, but like, when I take women through a journey, I take them in like little cohorts,
Mm-hmm.
where we can do as a group, like studying, deepening into biological femininity. I do
Mm-hmm.
have a membership. So my membership is basically a library of guest teachers, videos, classes on womanhood, but like a
Mm-hmm.
broader range of it. So
Yeah.
femininity, faith,
Mm.
um, and also like biological womanhood. So that's called
Mm-hmm.
Edenic Woman.
Okay.
Sometimes I open up registrations for it and I put it on the link in my bio
Okay.
in Instagram. But yeah, also because I'm quite busy with my life,
Mm-hmm.
homeschooling my
Mm-hmm.
kids, right?
Yeah.
I'm not doing anything actively right now as of this
Mm-hmm.
recording. But when I do, yeah, it's always Instagram that I post
Okay.
the link first. Yeah.
Okay. So if they want to find you, Instagram's the place.
It's the one place right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Cool. I am so grateful for your time and all the things you've shared. I am so excited to share this with my audience. I think it's going to resonate really deeply and bring in a layer that my content hasn't brought. So I'm really excited to share this, and I know it's going to be inspiring and helpful for people.
Thank you so much for having me, McKinley. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. And God bless
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, you too. And I'm sure maybe we'll do it again sometime.
That would be great.